put a Raspberry Pi and a touchscreen LCD panel together, and you've got everything you need for an Android-based tablet. So let's build one. Hi and welcome to Bytes and Bits. I was recently sent this LCD panel. So this is an 11.5 inch LCD touch panel. That was sent to me by a company called Elecrow to see what I could do with it. And I thought a nice big touch panel like this with quite high definition, teamed with a Raspberry Pi, would make a great Android tablet that I could sort of mount up on my wall and use that then as a general sort of information display. So let's first of all have a look and see what this tablet has and what the features of it are, and then we'll put it together with a Raspberry Pi and build up an Android-powered tablet. So as I said, this display is an 11.6 inch diagonal diameter on it, and that gives a resolution of 1366 by 768. So that's fairly good for this type of display. It is a 5-point capacitive touchscreen with good viewing angles, and it is an HDMI interface, so there's no sort of serial links or anything like that. It just plugs straight into the HDMI output from your single board computer. Now if we look on the back of it, you'll see that there is a circuit board mounted on there which has the electronics for the display. And looking at that unit then, if we go along the top panel from left to right, you can see there is a 5-volt out. So this board has its own power supply, and that power supply then is enough to drive both the screen and whatever single board computer you decide to attach to this. So that 5-volt output USB port is there to power your other computer. We then have an HDMI input. So basically your single board computer will output an HDMI signal which will plug directly in there. And then we have a touch screen, and that's a micro USB connector, and that will then take the output from the touch panel and feed that into your single board computer. And again, that operates as a standard touch panel, so you don't need to install any different drivers for that. It should just plug in and work straight away. So down the right hand side of our panel, we have the various screen control buttons for using the on-screen display and so on. Then at the bottom of that we have the power input, and it comes with its own sort of power brick. Along the bottom then we have an expander connector then for those buttons. So those buttons obviously would be round the back of your panel, but if you're going to mount this, and this panel actually is designed to be mounted into some sort of enclosure. There isn't any back to this, and as you can see there is some sticky tape around the back of the actual bezel. So this is designed to have a cutout in a panel and then be mounted onto that panel. So obviously you would lose access to these buttons. So there is a supplied little button board that simply plugs in down that bottom connector. And beside that bottom connector then, there is a speaker output. So the device does take its signal from your HDMI output from your board and will decode the sound for you. So it has got actual amplified speaker output there, or the little connector beside it there is a headphone socket, which you can of course use for sound as well. So the actual board then, as I say, that little red board is the electronics for the display. Beside that then there is an area, and as you can see there are a number of mounting posts, and those are movable along these sliders, so it will really fit any sort of single board computer. Again, that is sort of Raspberry Pi or slightly bigger sized in here. It has the posts obviously mount on 3 corners, so it will adjust to any size you want. So you could put a Raspberry Pi Zero in here if you wanted to, or a whole range of other boards. And again, if you check out the documentation for this board, you'll see the full range that it's compatible with. So looking at the actual display itself, I've got it running here. I say we're going to be building up an Android tablet, so I have it here running as an Android tablet. And you can see we have a nice clear display. I don't have any issues at all with color, resolution, and brightness and clarity. Viewing angles are really good. So overall, it's a very good display itself. The touch panel, I say it's a 5-point capacitive, so that operates very, very well, as you'll see with our Android operating system, or indeed any operating system that you put in here. You'll get that full 5-point capacitive touch. So we have a really nice display here, so that should not cause us any issues with running Android. We get a nice touch panel. So let's see how we can put that together then with our Raspberry Pi and build up a little customized Android tablet. Getting Android onto your Raspberry Pi, there are a couple of solutions which you can use. One of the ones I've been looking into is a product called Mteria. Now this is actually a commercial offering, but they do provide you with 3 free licenses before you have to start paying for the actual code itself. Now Mteria is a version of Android, but is very much put together for you to use as a base operating system upon which you'll then build your own applications. And as you can see from the sort of main website here, that's sort of what they're heading it towards. But if you do want to use this, you simply need to create yourself a login or an account with it. And once you create your account, you'll be given 3 free licenses. And then all you simply need to do is to go to the downloads page, download their app installer, and that will generate a SD card image for you, which you simply plug into your Raspberry Pi, and then you can boot up straight into this Mteria Android operating system. Now, as it is a heavily customized version, it does use the version of Android you'll be running will be a couple of versions behind the current versions, and the application store, they have their own version of that, which has a few pre-authorized applications which you can download. So there is nowhere near the variety you will get on the Play Store. And of course, they're very much targeted at the development environment. But it does give you an operating system upon which you can then, of course, start to work on. I haven't gone as far as trying to work out if you can sideload apps into it, and perhaps that is a possibility. But as I say, this is an option, and it is incredibly easy to get up and running with it, and it does run nicely on the Raspberry Pi, and even on my Raspberry Pi 3. But this isn't the one which I'm going to be using in this particular project, as again, I do want to make sure that we get hold of this app store so we can actually download the full range of Android apps. So the operating system I'm going to be looking at is something called Lineage, which again is another customized version of Android. And this one is developed for a range of devices. And of course, one of those devices is the Raspberry Pi. So this is more of a full version of Android, and one in which we can actually get the Google apps, including the Play Store, to load into it. Now, obviously, there are licensing arrangements based on that, so we do have to do it in a slightly different way, but it is possible. So let's have a look at how we can get LineageOS onto our Raspberry Pi. To get hold of LineageOS for our Raspberry Pi, we need to go to constakang.com. And again, all the links and code that I'm using in the tutorial will be linked to from the description down below. So please do visit the project page on my bytesandbits.co.uk website for all that information. But if we go to this website, this is a customized build of LineageOS for a range of devices, including the Raspberry Pi. So if you go up to the devices menu at the top here, you'll see that we've got a Raspberry Pi 3 and Raspberry Pi 4 download options. So I'm using a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus for this build, so I'm going to go to that section. And on there, you can see there's a range of versions that we can use. So I'm just going to use the latest version here. So the latest for the Raspberry Pi 3 is Android version 10. So we just simply need to go off and download this file and then have that ready to use. Now, LineageOS doesn't come bundled with the Google Apps, and that includes the Play Store app. So we're going to have to install that separately. And we're going to have to do that then through this other system, so this OpenGAPPS website. So if you head across to there, again, you need to customize the version that you're going to download. So we're going to download this for our ARM processor for the Raspberry Pi. We're going to be using Android version 10, and I'm just going to download the Pico version, which really just comes bundled with the Play Store app. You can, of course, then download different versions here with different amounts of the Google infrastructure built into that. But I just need the Pico one to get us up and running for this. Now, this file I'm going to download, and then I'm actually going to put it onto a USB stick because we're going to need it on a USB stick in a little while. So that's all the software that we're going to need, and we simply now need to generate an SD card. So the Constacang LineageOS file that we just downloaded, we need to burn that onto an SD card. So I'm just using Etcher here to create that SD card for me, and then we're going to use that in our Raspberry Pi. As you power on the Raspberry Pi, it will go through a bit of setup and installation process, and then it will take you into the Lineage Android setup screens. And these are pretty much as standard, so just work your way through the various options, getting everything set up. Eventually then it will drop you out and it will restart the system and take you into the Lineage Android interface. And at this point, you really are into a standard Android tablet. The initial install of LineageOS is very clean. If I pull up from the bottom here, we can see what apps have been installed, and there really isn't very much there at all, just some basic sort of housekeeping and browsing and so on. So that's very, very handy that we don't have to get rid of lots of extra bits and pieces. But obviously the things which are missing from this are the Google Apps and especially our Google Play Store link. So we do need to get into that and get that installed. So for that we need to go into our settings and turn on the developer options. So again, we've got the nice touchscreen interface here on this particular panel. So I can just swipe across and I can go to settings, or I can use the sort of side pull down here and we can go into settings through that route. But once in our settings screen, if we come down to the bottom of this, we have the About Tablet section, and inside that, once it comes up, we have a build number. Now, to get developer options turned on, we need to keep pressing build number. A little message will come up the bottom down here, and as we press it, we'll eventually then get into the section where we turn on our developer options. So you can see it's telling me how many steps I need to take. And then we're in here, we just confirm that then with our PIN number, and that should enable our developer options. So if I come back to my settings, we need to change a couple of things in those developer options. So that will be in the Systems section, Advanced, and Developer Options. Now we just scroll down a wee bit on here. So we want to do some work in the back of our Android system. So we need root access for that. And we can just simply turn it on with this little switch. And we just say OK to that warning message. Once we're into root, we will need a terminal app, which will let us then talk to our application or our sort of operating system. So we need to turn on the local terminal app. And that will then just install that little app, which we can then use to type in some command line options. I need to come out of developer options to save that. But while we're in the system settings, it's worth having a look that there is an advanced settings here, which is part of the Raspberry Pi setup. If we go in there, you can see that we have a number of options as to how the Raspberry Pi is set up. But one of the things which is perhaps you might want to have a look at as well is obviously with a Raspberry Pi on this screen here, which is just an LCD screen with a touch interface on it. We don't have any of the Android buttons such as the power button and our volume key buttons, and of course those are used at various instances in the Android operating system. So with the Raspberry Pi version, you can see that we can use a couple of GPIO pins to mimic those particular buttons. So that might be something which you want to have a play with. I'm not going to bother with that in this video, but just be aware that that's where you can then add in these button functionality. So we've enabled those developer options, and we're coming back out of our settings to make sure all that is saved. And at this point we need to reset. Now if you have a keyboard plugged in, you can get to the power options through the F5 key, but obviously I'm just using it straight as a pure tablet. So at the moment I don't have access to the power off functionality. I need to install an app for that, and of course we need to get our Google app, our Play Store app installed. So at the moment I'm just going to power down and power back up again. So we're back into Android again. Now the basic process we're going to go through here is that we need to add the Google Apps code into our recovery system. And once we then recover our Android, in effect do a factory reset on it, that will then install the Google Apps for us into the base operating system. So at this point we need to make sure that we have that OpenGAPPS code that we downloaded earlier on a USB drive that is plugged into our Raspberry Pi. So we need to be able to start our Android tablet in recovery mode. And with the Raspberry Pi, we don't have the buttons we need to access that in the normal way. So we're going to have to use a terminal app to actually add some code and execute that for us. And that's where we had to then install that root access and the terminal app. So once we've rebooted, if we bring up our app tray, and we'll find we have a terminal sitting in there. So we need to start up our terminal app. And we need to allow it and give it permissions to access everything. So again, once that comes up, we now have an on-screen keyboard. If you've got a keyboard plugged in, obviously you'll be able to use that keyboard itself. So we need to give ourselves super user powers. So if I come in here and do ISU, that should now elevate us up to a root access. And now we need to execute a little script which will start recovery mode for us. Now, depending on what version of Raspberry Pi you have, either Raspberry Pi 3 or Raspberry Pi 4, we want to do RPi then 3 or 4 depending on what version you have. We will then need our hyphen, and then it's recovery.sh. .sh. So once we run that script, that will prepare the system to reboot into recovery mode. We then need to do a reboot, and that should bring us back into recovery mode once it restarts. So once that's booted back up, we should be now into our recovery mode. So you see that there are a number of warnings coming up on here, but basically what happens is it's asking us if we want to allow modifications. So we need to swipe to allow modifications. Now once we do that, we want to mount some drives. So we need to make sure that we have our boot drive selected, our system data, so boot drive, system data, and our USB on the go drive mounted. So once we've done that, we need to then select our storage, and our storage is going to be on our USB drive. That's where we put our Google Apps code. So we want to OK that. At this point, we want to go back to our main menu. We now want to go to install, and we should then see that we have our option here to install our Google Apps. So we want to just click on that, and then we want to make sure that we swipe that to confirm flashing that into our recovery system. So once that's finished installing, we need to go back to the recovery home bit. We need to do a wipe because we're going to do a factory reset now. So we have to swipe to confirm that factory reset. And then we want to reboot our system. So once that reboots, you should find that you are into the Google Apps version of reinstalling Android onto your tablet. So you just simply need to go through that, connecting up to your Google account. I would say here when it talks about downloading apps and so on, I would skip those stages. You don't want it really syncing up with your normal phone and so on. As well as then backing up, you probably don't want to back up this tablet onto your Google Apps account. But do go through the whole process then of connecting everything up, getting all of your settings correct, and eventually you should then drop back into Android with a tablet which has now got the Google Play Store attached, so we can go off and start to add whatever apps we want to. So if we open up the Google Play Store, you can see that we then have just our normal system, and we can start to install whatever sort of bits of software we want to from here. So we now have a fully working Android tablet which we can set up whatever way we want. Now, one of the problems that we have with the installation of Lineage is that the disk image that we create on the SD card is actually quite a small image. It doesn't use all of the actual space on our hard drive. So if we go back into our settings screen in here, and if we then go across and have a look at our storage space, again, I'm running this on a Raspberry Pi 3, so we are getting sort of fairly slow performance on Android. And we go down to our storage area. We should see in there then that although I have a 64 gigabyte SD card in here, we can see here that it's only coming up as being 8 gigabyte card with 3 gigabytes spare. So we do need to do something about that. So let's see if we can resize that partition to release that extra space. Now, all of the Constacang images do install as the smaller hard drives. So they have produced a little app which will expand out that partition to fill the rest of your SD card. So you need to go back to the constacang.com website and back to the version of Android which you have downloaded and used on your Raspberry Pi. In effect, I don't think you need to get to exactly the same one. I think these little apps are just common to all of them. But anyway, if you go back to the one where we downloaded our SD card image from, if we scroll down, you'll see on the FAQs there are a number of questions in there, and one of those is about the system size of the SD card, and we have this little resize zip app here. Now, this is another little app which runs inside the recovery mode of the Android operating system. So the same way in which we installed our GApps, we will use the same file to do that. So I'm going to download that onto my USB drive. So I just simply go through there, and I'm just simply going to download that. And once that's downloaded, I can then take that across to my Raspberry Pi, and we'll install it in the same way that we did the GApps applications. So I've got my USB stick plugged in. I've gone through the getting back into the recovery mode. So I've gone through my terminal and typed in those little commands. I've mounted my drives as again. So again, exactly the same as we did with our GApps. I'm going back into the install section. You can now see that we have our resize app there. So I'm just going to select that, and I'm going to flash that. And at that point, you see the messages down here. The partition has been resized. So I'm simply going to reboot back into my system. So once that boots back up, we should be able to go across into our settings again. And there we can see in our storage area, we now have 8.39 gigabytes used of a total of 64 gigabytes. So our SD card partition is now filling the full space on that device. So that's pretty much then our Android tablet based on a Raspberry Pi and this nice touchscreen LCD panel. As regards performance, Raspberry Pi 3 performance on Android it's pretty abysmal, to be honest. I have to be honest with that. The Pi 4s do give much better performance, so perhaps I'll need to finally bite the bullet and upgrade to that once they hit the shelves. I'll be using mine hopefully then as a little display panel for my to-do list and emails and so on. And this panel, as I say, is very good for that. And with the touchscreen interface, I can run everything just straight off the screen. So I'll just simply mount that probably on my wall as a fairly static sort of to-do list display. If you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell to find out when the next videos are going to be released. I hope you've enjoyed this. I look forward to seeing you again soon, and bye for now. For more games programming, electronics projects, and retro gaming, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and visit my website.